students, welcome to the Swayam portal of online refresher course in philosophy under MHRD, Government of India. Today we will discuss the module on the theme under Indian theories of language, Dinnāga theory of meaning. In this module, I propose to discuss Dinnāga's theory of meaning, which aims at the refutation of the realistic notion of reality and language. It is considered to be radical paradigm shift against the Brahmanic tradition. Dinnāga is followed by some of the most important Buddhist thinkers like Vasubandhu, Dharmkirti, Shantarakshit, Kamalsheel, Gyanashri and Ratnakīrti, who represent a long philosophical tradition of Sarvastivad, Vibhashika, Swatantrika, Yogacharya, Vigyanvad, and their views in the fields of ontology, epistemology and philosophy of language, developed in continuous interactions with the non-Buddhist thinkers like Bhartrihari, Udyotkar, Kumaril and Vachaspati. Of them, Ratnakīrti culminates the development of Buddhism and Udyan, a Nyayika, inflicts assault on it. However, in the present module, I shall confine myself to Dinnāga only. First, we will start with Buddhist ontological reductionism. The Buddhists admit two kinds of reality. Firstly, event, which is fundamental, unanalyzable and irreducible, and second, continuant, which is derived from it. In our day-to-day transactions, only the continuants are talked and thought about and become the designate of words. Only such continuants are subject matter of empirically meaningful statements. In their reductionist program, any true statement about an ostensibly being such as chair is derivative and reducible to the statements of actual and possible interest. This program is a principal device to get rid of fictitious entities like universals, whose seeming ontological reference claim in a statement is demonstrated to be empty in content. Its another advantage is to maintain a clear-cut distinction between fundamental being and derivative one, and to make us commit ontologically to former primarily and to the later secondarily. It also helps demolish many metaphysical myths and the dogmatic arrogance of naive realism, as well as purely speculative idealism without making commitment to any alternative imagination. It refrains from falling prey to pretentious knowledge claim of others. Demolishing any existential belief in such knowledge claim automatically demolishes the judgments of truth and reality arising from such claims. This is a step forward to the realization of quietude, that is nirvana, the summum bonum of every human being. The Buddhist slogan, "To be is to be an instantaneous being," is the culmination of their reductionist program. The whole Buddhist epistemology is set to make a distinction between ultimate reality, Swalakshan, and the reality given to us in our everyday perceptual experience, that is Samanya Lakshan. Throughout Buddhist philosophical literature, we find that Buddhist philosophers have set the major task of their epistemological inquiry to examine the justifications of various kinds of knowledge claims made by our cognitive or non-cognitive beliefs, thought and language. The Buddhists are well aware of the subjective elements implicit in all kinds of knowledge claim, but this does not mean that one should be a thorough skeptic to every knowledge claim. The need is to show the essential limitation of any knowledge claim and find a way out of pure rational and mythical construction and judge its applicability only in a spatio-temporal cause system and in terms of causal efficiency and accomplishment of human interest. Moving on, now we will have Buddhist conceptions of given and constructed. The subjective elements involving distortions and manipulations in knowledge claim and thinking raise certain significant questions. Mainly, if subjective elements are indispensable, how is it possible to know the true nature of given? The more basic question is, what is given? An internal or external reality? Before answering these questions, we shall first have to answer the question, what are those things which are given to us in our direct perception? It is shown that the immediately given to the mind are sense data, which are mental events. The first mental activity is to blur the distinction between the sense data and the construct, their flow as a continuant, which is the intended object of any knowledge in our conventional sense. What is given in such knowledge is on analysis found to be constructed, and the actual given becomes merely an internal event. Thus, both constructed and given are internal. The fundamental given is in the form of material form, rupa, feelings, vedana, perceptions, samagya, disposition, sanskar, and consciousness, vigyan. The Buddhist worldview is developed on these foundations. They try to examine every presupposition they admit for any theory, construction, and allow it to take its logical and natural directions in its development. They are not guided by any preconceived model or thought pattern. The Buddhists maintain that some of the fundamental entities are in our direct experiential contact. Their world is the world of spatio-temporal causal system, which is open to public. The particular manner of interrelatedness of the fundamental entities produce a form of the world in secondary sense. The world in the primary sense is the totality of the fundamental entities, which are momentary, events endowed with the status of being with existence. The ultimate entity by nature cannot be a subject of prediction and is conception free, that is nirvikalpa. A construction with shared features, samanya lakshan, is innate in our knowing process. In our everyday transactions, such constructions constitute our common world of spatio-temporal causal network. Any actual locatable state of affair should be taken in this sense. In our philosophical analysis of the world, we shunt between fundamental entities and the derivative ones. The latter, such as chair, tree, table, are particulars of ordinary men, which in Buddhist philosophy are merely names of different series of events, somehow interrelated in a temporal order, forming a continuant in spatio-temporal continuum. Other entities of the world like X-rays, which are not in direct experiential contact, are very much real with existence because they are working in our spatio-temporal causal system and are thus predictably and regularly capable of accomplishing human purpose of diagnosing diseases. The Buddhist opines that the continuance or any construction must be grounded in the given and the object immediate perception, the first order construction, but the second realities like chair do not justifiably give rise to a further reality like chair universal or chairness. It is simply our manner of speaking that certain type of continuance or common man's particulars are called by a common name like chair. The prediction of an individual as chair, as in the sentence, this is a chair, is not because of a higher being chair universal or chairness, whose instances are individual chairs having been located or inherent in these individuals. The Buddhists thus keep the universal as higher beings outside the world of spatio-temporal causal system. At the most, universal can be called pure mental or abstract entities, which are unfamiliar in experience as opposed to the concrete ones which are familiar and found in our everyday world. Conceptualism and nominalism. Now we can say that there is a cautious entity of universals, but not as extra mental and extra linguistic realities into the Buddhist framework of philosophizing. The Buddhists maintain that mind's intrinsic incapacity to know the fundamental entity as it is and the similar modes of appearances sadrishya of these entities in a series given rise to the notion of continent. This process is innate, but when such continents further similar in appearances are subjected to experience, we naturally classify them in one group, each member of which is denoted by the same general term, say chair. This helps recognize an individual as chair in a knowledge situation. The use of general concepts and the terms like chair is learnt in social context. Since the general terms and the concepts are indispensably functional in our language, thought and action, the realist by necessity of their systems, logics and compelled to possess a higher being with existence, which is located in individuals, often called its instances. The Buddhist analysis of being with existence proves that universals are pure mental concepts, and if assigned ontological status, they will create a number of insurmountable philosophical problems, absurdness, confusions and perplexities. At language level, the use of the same predicate to describe different continents by extension encourages one to construct many metaphysical realities. From the preceding discussions, it follows that the Buddhists are now able to distinguish the various uses of the verb exist, as exemplified in the following sentences. Event exists, chair exists, cow exists, country exists, aggregate of bricks exist, universal exist. Our manner of speaking of the verb exist instinctively makes us believe in the ontological status of the subject it qualifies. From the above uses of the verb exist, it is to be concluded that in Buddhism, apart from the fundamental and immediately derivative modes of existence of entities as being with existence, no other use of exist genuinely speaks of ontological status of an entity as being with existence. Such entities as universals are mere concepts and names. In Buddhism, the whole business prediction falls under various mental acts. Prediction is sensibly applicable only in the case of immediately derivative entities. Any further derivation is estranged from being designated as being with existence. The purpose of the Buddhist is dissolving hypostatization of mental constructs like universal out of experience, thought and language is to pave the way for sublime quietity, that is nirvana. Their conceptualism and nominalism are directed towards this goal. Since generalization and the use of general terms are not derived directly from any cognitive act or the process of understanding and is instinctive in origin, the notion of universal as an extra mental reality falls apart. Moving on, now we will ponder upon Buddhist theory of description and intersubjective discourse. Denial of ontological status to purely mental constructs does not entitle the Buddhist to be called skeptic or nihilist. They very much allow the use of description and recognize meaningful discourses. In the world of continents, meaning and reference can go together, but in respect of fundamental entities, there is possibility of only meaning and not reference. Any theory of description takes the status of subject and the nature of its predicates, their meanings and truth reference into account. Description of the fundamental entities, Swalakshan, is possible only through the reductionist program envisaged above. Technically, it is called adhyavasai, that is determination through inference. For any genuine description or meaningful intersubjective discourse, the immediately derivative continuants are the common basis. They are directly given in our common experience. The use of language is learned in constant social and environmental context, which make the meaning business a matter of mental habits. As I have said, in our everyday transactions, lok vyavhar, the continents become the particulars, the basic units of the world. Hereafter, intersubjective discourse in any mode of description presupposes a common conceptual scheme. There is not much social or moral problem until now, but when the question of interpreting this world arises, we find that different alternative interpretations are offered, which are sometimes found simply differing, but at the other times violently opposed to each other. When this difference is translated into our behavior, there arise various kinds of social conflicts, the end result of which is human suffering. The Buddhists make all-out effort to eliminate human suffering by changing the attitude and demonstrating the dangerous implications of subjectivity and creativity of pure rationality. We know the world only through our mental habits formed in a particular social context. This means that the world, objective world, that is the so-called common world, cannot genuinely be described according to any philosophic framework. Further, since different philosophic frameworks and interpretations give different descriptions of the same world, the intersubjective discourse becomes an impossibility, which will be, in Buddhist opinion, the most dangerous things for the entire humanity as well as biosphere. Dinnāga on particular and universal. On particular and universal, Dinnāga pursues further the general Buddhist conception. He maintains two kinds of real particular or events, swalakshan and continuance, which is constructed on the perpetual flow of these particulars, radiating uniform appearances. Mind only constructs these appearances as unitary, eka, which is the source of the idea of continent endowed with various aspects such as form and color. Although the particulars are different from each other, mind, flowing the principle of abstraction, constructs the unity or uniformity among them. Dinnāga holds that universal, although not an extra mental reality, is mistaken for being with existence, because its assigned properties are apprehended in many continuants as empirical particulars. I think, unlike Radhika Herzberger, that Dinnāga uses the two terms Samanya Lakshan and Samanya in different senses. The former is used in the case of a continuant, which is constructed on the basis of direct sense perception, while the later is used for universal property located in many continents. The universal property is called universal, Samanya or Jati, having the characteristics of being one and eternal, and located in each instance of a certain class of continents individuals. Radhika Herzberger commits a serious mistake in interpreting Dinnāga because she did not understand the basic difference between the two terms. Dinnāga accepts the empirical reality of Samanya Lakshan, but denies the same in the case of Samanya. He shows the logical impossibility of a real universal because its two characteristics, oneness and repeatable in many particulars, are mutually incompatible. Dinnāga therefore does not commit to universal any ontological status, being with existence in either primary or secondary sense. Universal, according to him, is an explanatory presupposition, an imagination of mind. Moving on to the Dinnāga theory of names and denotation. Dinnāga, by maintaining a distinction between the fundamental reality and the derivative one, draws a demarcation line between the two fields of conception free and pre-predicative sense experience, which is knowledge free from mental construction, and the predicative conception laden, that is savikalpa, abstractional, conventional and scientific knowledge. Only the later has its intended object in spatio-temporal continuum. This is the level of our experience of empirical objects. This creates a field for various kinds of transactions concerning knowledge, thought, action, meaning, value, judgment, etc. All this possible by the activities of our mind, which by its constitution is an organizing and naming giving principle. It assigns various names to the derivative entity with respect to its various aspects. The mental function is technically called kalpana, which is defined as that which assigns names denoting proper name, genus, substance, quality and action of an individual. All these names are general terms which designate the properties of a continent individual. The application of these terms is not without ontological basis. A continent individual has many properties and a general name can designate only one of them. This means that the same individual, say a tree, can be designated by different terms or names like tree, earthly, substance and existent, as it is supposed to possess various aspects. The process of designation by a term is made possible through the method of association and dissociation. Radhika Herzberger summarizes Dinnāga's point on the theory of names as follows. Names denote object on the basis of shared features. What is denoted by a name on the basis of shared feature is neither an intrinsic feature, Swalakshan, nor a shared feature, Samanyalakshan, but objects which are members of a class. Names have multiple denotations. Demonstratives are the only mode of singular denotation. Two or more names can denote the same objects. Further, since names are general terms and a name applies to a constant individual, we mistake the name for referring or denoting a continent individual. Secondly, the general terms are intrinsically taken as designating with being with existence. This commits us to their ontological status. Dinnāga, in order to get rid of the problem of denotation in two cases, one in the case of a continent individual being taken as an instance of a universal being, and second, the universal being itself, devised a double negation theory known as Apohavad, which safely overcomes these difficulties. He, for the purpose of interpreting language-reality relationship, suggested that a continent individual can be referred to only by a demonstrative like this or that, because is locable in space, whereas universal, since it is not a being with existence, can be referred to neither by a demonstrative nor a general term. The double negation theory applies to such general terms only, not to demonstratives. With regard to the proper name, Dinnāga says it is an arbitrary term. It does not describe its bearer. It only demonstratively denotes a continent individual, which is a higher complex being. Lastly, we will discuss about double negation theory of meaning, that is Apohavad. The preceding discussions paved the way for understanding Dinnāga double negation theory of meaning. This is a theory of explanation sought to explain the true meaning and functioning of kalpana, generated linguistic entities, their interrelationship and our ontological commitment to what they stand for. We will see in this section that the double negation theory in wider context of event theory of reality is designed to show that a linguistic entity functions exactly like an inferential sign in generating knowledge. The interrelationship of such entities are found, according to Dinnāga, only in the context of sentence, and any ontological commitment to corresponding extra-linguistic entities like universal is nothing but extended application of linguistic entities. Even a singular referent like event, which is ultimately irreducible, what it stands for is the reducible derivative continent individual, which is a synthesis of a series of discrete but similar cognitive acts. But such referents, which are second order realities, are admissible in our everyday transactions. The two orders of reality represents the two types of world, micro world and macro world respectively. the referent of a word like cow, which has spatiotemporal status, is a complex fact called cow, that is a continent individual. The same is the case with the referents of the other linguistic entities, namely proper names, adjectival names, genus name, verbial names and substantival names. The double negation theory directly applies to these names or linguistic entities by showing their ultimate emptiness in content. The other items mentioned above are explained easily. If the linguistic entities are vacuous in content, their meanings and interrelationship also will have to be admitted empty in content. In the very first karika of his Praman Samuchay, chapter 5, Dinnāga discusses the nature and function of world. Word-generated knowledge is not a different source of knowledge from inferential knowledge. The word designates its own object by negating other. Then what is designates? Just as the inferential sign, having been genuinely establishes what is to be proved. This karika clearly says that the process of knowing derived from word or linguistic sign is similar to the process of knowing from inferential sign. I am not dwelling upon this issue here. For me, more important issue at present is that of notion of double negation and the kind of being it is subjected to. I touched upon the issues earlier as to why to free ourselves from committing the ontological or existential status to the constructed and nominal entities, which are the reference of linguistic entities. Now, in philosophical analysis, the issue of how to achieve this result is settled by introducing the double negation theory by Dinnāga. Let us take an example of an affirmative sentence which is frequently used in our everyday transactions. This is a chair. We can analyze this sentence in a realist way as follows. Thus, which is demonstrative ostensibly refers to a continent individual which has spatiotemporal status and when used in isolation does not assign any predicate to the object. But in the sentence it is predicated for chair, which is a generic name, jati shabd, and which qualifies this the individual. When the predicate chair is used, this becomes the individual chair and the predicate chair becomes the universal chair. The same sentence can be paraphrased as this chair has chairness, which says three things. First, there is an individual chair, there is universal chair located in individual chair, and lastly, there is possessive relation between individual chair and universal chair. For Dinnāga, as long as demonstrative is used and no kalpana generated descriptive or predicative words are used, there is no need of applying the double negation technique. But a predicate word like chair demands too much and a common man commits being with existence to such predicates. Going beyond the scope of the empirical world, a network of spatio-temporal causal system. Double negation technique is required to be used in such cases so that unwarranted and non-empirical entities like universal and relation are estranged from their existential status. In Buddhism, the referent of this, a continent individual, also is a constructed and derived entity, but it has its pragmatic use in our world. Therefore, there is no need of subjecting a demonstrative to double negation operation, which in Dinnāga cases is a purely linguistic device. But double negation theory is simply a philosophic and linguistic paraphrasing which maintains a semantic distinction between a properly loaded name and the negation of its correlates. Thus, cow equals to non-cow. This is an indirect way of referring to an object estranged from the universal property which is empty in content. Dinnāga double negation theory of meaning was further modified and elaborated in the light of the criticism by the Mīmānsakas and the Nyayikas. By Dharmakirti, Shantarakshit, Gyanshri and Ratnakīrti. In this module, I have presented a very synoptic account of their contribution made in this regard. Thank you.